It's one thing for me to tell you why Harrison Ingram is a great addition for the Tar Heels. It's an entirely different thing for somebody to tell you who's seen it up close and personal.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Thursday, April 27th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and I want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch of the day. You everydayers, you know we've been talking about getting ready to have this conversation today, and so we're going to dive straight into it. We're joined today by a dude you have never seen before on this show. His name is Parker Ainsworth, and he is the host of the Locked On Cougs podcast. That is our network's Houston Cougars podcast. And you might be wondering, Isaac, why on earth is this guy joining the show today? Have you absolutely lost your mind? Well, Parker aside, yes, I've always lost my mind, but Parker's joining us today for a couple very important reasons. First off, he's awesome, and usually he has this incredible display of shoes behind him. Unfortunately, you don't get to see that today because my man's getting ready to have a baby. Congrats, Parker. Happy for you.
Thank you.
Secondly, and the very specific reason he's joining us today is that Parker has a very unique connection to a recent addition to the Tar Heels family. And so, Parker, would you just tell us who this recent addition to the Tar Heels is and what that connection is?
One Harrison Ingram, who I guess as an assistant coach and scouting person, I was 1-5 against. So maybe I'm not the best scout, but I had to coach against him in high school for 4 years, and yeah, I got very acquainted with his game over the course of trying to figure out how to stop said game.
Sounds like with that 1-5 record, as you said, it didn't necessarily go too well all the time, but that's what you get when you play a very high level recruit. So Parker, what was the name of your high school? What was the name of Harrison's high school?
So I coach a school in North Texas called Green Hill School. It's a co-ed school. It's a high-end academic school. And Harrison went to St. Mark's, which is a high-end academic all-boys school, not too far down the road in Dallas. And there's a rivalry of sorts there. They're also, both schools are in this conference that spans DFW, Houston, Austin, of higher-end academic schools called the Southwest Preparatory Conference. It's had pros come through it, though. Justice Winslow, DeAndre Jordan, Jared Allen. It's had guys, like it seems to have one every so often. And when Harrison stepped into the conference as a freshman, it was very clear that he was kind of the next one of those guys. Yeah. He was a imposing freshman off the jump. But I was really impressed with him all 4 years. His senior year was the 2020 to 21 school year, which was like very, shortened with COVID. Throughout the season, teams would take 2 weeks off at a time and stuff like that. But he was a very impressive high school basketball player across the 4 years. McDonald's All-American the whole nine.
Man, so folks, you hear it and see it right out of the gate. Parker is going to be able to give us a very unique view into exactly who it is the Tar Heels are getting and what he can add, Harrison Ingram that is, to this team. So we're going to look at things like scouting Harrison Ingram, as Parker said he did often, Harrison Ingram's game, how he'll fit specifically with North Carolina, etc. But Parker, I just want to start by talking about specifically his game before we get into that scouting side. So you talked about, like, from the jump when he arrived on campus as a freshman at St. Mark's, that he was already this imposing freshman. What did you see in the high school version of Harrison Ingram? Like what just out of the gate set him apart?
Super selfless. I was really, really impressed from his freshman year. He was on a very talented team. They had, I think his junior season, they had 3 other guys that are all currently playing Division I basketball. Very, very talented team. And it was, frankly, like we wanted to try and turn him into a scorer because we could at least tell where the offense is going to come from then. He was, from his freshman year, was the kind of guy that wanted to split his zone to drop it off to the big or split his zone to kick it out. He is truly a team first, win first kind of guy in a way that was really impressive at 14. I mean, he didn't look 14 at 14, but really impressive at 14.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I love what you just said about making him a scorer, because I love the way you phrase that, because then you know where the scoring is coming from. By that, I'm assuming you're meaning if you're allowing him to be a distributor, you don't know where it's going. You don't know who's scoring. And so let's force him to be the one that beats us by putting the ball in the bucket rather than being able to spread the love around. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, I mean, they had a sharpshooter in the corners that is, I guess, now at Rice, but went to Vanderbilt initially. And, you know, if we could keep Harrison keep the ball in Harrison's hands, we knew it wasn't going there. Or they had one kid that went to Penn that was also pretty, guys are really talented around him. And so when Harrison was able to kick it around to all of them, we were just kind of all on 5 different islands, right? If we could funnel it all to Harrison as a scorer, he might get his 30 or 40, but we could kind of navigate, we just had to match, with 40, 50 on the other end. It was a lot. It was a lot. We didn't do it well all the time, but it was a lot.
So you said your team was 1-5 against him in his years in high school. Were they a successful team? How well did they do? How far did they go?
Yeah, I think the highest we finished in those years would have been a third. We got to the final a year after Harrison was in high school. The truth is that we had our own kids going to Denver. One went to Sam Houston State. So we had our own handful of D1 kids, but nothing. Our size guys that matched up with Harrison were not quite the, we all thought he was a one and done. Like I said, we saw Jared Allen a couple years prior, Justice Winslow a couple years before that. And I assumed he was the kind of guy he's going to have 1 year of college. We're going to see him in the NBA draft. Man.
So what about his team? What about St. Mark's? How did they perform? Did they win state titles? What did they do?
So they won in the traditional sense his junior season. They won the whole thing. They got to the semifinal his sophomore year. And then his senior year, they went undefeated, but they only played 9 games because of the the lack of games throughout the season. I will say his senior year, in those 11 games, he was a rebound away from a triple-double. He was, again, an impact guy at every point of the basketball game. But again, very strong basketball team, obviously. And his sophomore, junior, senior was semifinal, won the whole thing, and then undefeated. So.
Well, and so this is really interesting to me, Parker, because you said you guys all saw him and thought, man, this is Jared Allen. This is another one of these Justice Winslow, other one and done guys. He was a 5-star coming out, ranked 19th overall by 247 Sports, projected one and done by everybody. And yet, here we are now with him preparing to enter year 3 of college. Why do you think that is?
So the numbers aren't gaudy. They don't stick off the paper in the kind of way that makes you oodle for a guy that, no offense to Stanford, but they don't get a whole lot of one and done. You would assume that a guy that's coming through there at 6'7", I think he's got a 7-foot wingspan. He's got crazy long arms. I think I saw someone that had measured at 7 foot. Yep. He's also got good weight on him. He's 220, 230. And you would think that kind of guy could, be the focal point for Stanford the same way, at a high-end academic institution, I think of Jalen Brown was, different athlete, but the same kind of role at Cal, right? Yeah. Instead, he just he had 10-8-4 more or less both seasons, and I think the deal is everyone 10-8-4, and Stanford was about 500, and not looking for impact. He doesn't have a 35-point win or a 35-point game against Oregon in a win or something like that, or a 30-point game against Arizona in a win, because he's not, when he's playing his best and trying to make help the team win, he's not going to be your takeover score 30 kind of guy. He's going to, again, he's close to the Draymond Green stat line, right? 5 across the board.
Yeah, man, that's so interesting. Well, what we want to do is look more at this, because you, Parker, have literally scouted Harrison Ingram to play against him multiple times. What did your teams try to exploit? What did your teams have to be aware of? We want to talk about all of that, and we'll get to it in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Folks, are you looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever, and that is Built. You got to try it. If you're like me and you're trying to make some healthier snack choices, which I don't want to do, but I need to do because yikes, but you don't want to compromise on taste, then I got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. These bars are healthy and taste amazing. And so you won't even think they're good for you, but they really are. And what makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real dark chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro and peanut butter brownie. Parker, I don't know about you, man. I'm diving in on that churro stuff because it is legit. I'm not legitimately, folks. I don't know how Built does this, but they taste so good and maintain amazing macros. Only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. Perhaps best of all, now you don't have to sit around waiting for the delivery guy to come bring you the box from Built.com. You can just hustle on down to your local Sam's Club or Walmart, which for me is like that way 2 minutes, and go get yourself a box. You could get a 4-count of cookies and cream at Walmart. Or if you like to bulk up because you got like 30 kids in your family, then you can go on down to Sam's Club and get a 13-bar box with something like brownie batter puffs or the churro puffs. Folks, you can thank me later when you go try a Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Hey, we'd like to thank you so much for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen every day. I know Parker would feel the same about Locked On Cougs. Coming up on the show tomorrow is going to be some more great content on Friday, continuing to look at the shape of this Carolina basketball roster. All right, Parker, let's get back into this thing. I want to look at, we've talked already a little bit about you scouting Harrison Ingram, and I want to dive in on that a little more specifically and in depth. Before we talk about exploiting weaknesses, I want to talk about what to watch out for. So, let me put it to you 2 ways, and then you can decide how you want to run with it. When you scouted Harrison Ingram, what would be at the top of your scout list to, hey, watch out for this? Or I kind of like this way to say it. Harrison Ingram could be in the NBA today already because fill in the blank.
So he really is a positionless defender. Even at Stanford, and he was fun to watch at Stanford as a guy that coached against him because I saw him do it. But even at Stanford, he really covered 1 through 4, right? He covered 4 spots on the floor. And truthfully, if you had a small ball big, he could cover that guy too. It was interesting in Stanford's lineups, like, I guess technically on their roster, he's the 4th tallest, or he's their 2nd tallest guy because they started traditional 5, but they played a lot of time with a 6'9" 5 out there. And because of his broad shoulders and long arms, he was kind of the biggest guy on the floor for them. And so I really, I was impressed when, as a sophomore, he's 6'7", 220, sophomore in high school, I should say. So 6'7", 220, and at the front of the press, right? Like he's working the front of a 2-2-1 press. He's got those long arms on, you talk about like running around trapping and like being trapped by a future NBA player. It was impressive to see because, typically at 6'7", 220, you're thinking lumbering, even if they have some offensive skill to their game. And then you also think of like typical high-end D1 talent guys, and are they, taking nights off on, or taking plays off on defense to the highlight on offense. And he wasn't that guy being stretched. I think the truth is that at a program like North Carolina, getting to show off under, the blue blood kind of lights a little bit, the ability to switch a bunch of different positions, because he is 6'7", 220. In a t-shirt, he walks in the room. He doesn't look like an athlete in the sense that like he kind of looks like he's got a little bit the Draymond Green kind of pudge, and he has all those kind of, you wonder, like, do people like stereotype it almost like he's too heavy to be out of there on the perimeter? And I have to say, I think he can, both in what he did at Stanford, and then, people smarter than I had him doing that kind of stuff as McDonald's. That's why he got selected to go to the McDonald's All-American game. He, in a positionless basketball world, I don't know. I think he's just got to be on the floor. Again, he does impact the game in a lot of different ways.
That's so interesting. Well, what about the flip side of that, Parker? Like, Harrison Ingram would not yet, or isn't yet, in the NBA because what? Like, when you're scouting him, what would you want your team to try to exploit that could help in a basketball game?
So the first thing we would do, and again, I say we would do like we were successful and we didn't win every game. But the first thing we would try to do, I should say, is we would, once we got the ball to him, the backside help had to like make sure they cut to the midline and those, make sure that like there were no backside cutters and that kind of stuff, because he was going to find cutters. And so Stanford, again, great school, fun program when they're good, but they don't have the athletes that are like beating a bunch of guys backdoor on the baseline if you catch in the high post, right? And then, truthfully, once we got him the ball and had covered up the backside for cutters and stuff like that, we try and make him into a jump shooter like you do. And it looks like on his long distance twos and threes. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well at Stanford, right? And I could see how being the focal point of so much, it'd be really easy as a defensive coach or, a defense scheme to force him into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And admittedly, like, that's the kind of game where he's going to have to develop something to get to the NBA or to get a long career in the NBA, right? He's just not quite the shooter from that distance. He can get to the rim in one-on-one situations, but if you can kind of, hedge that back line with, think about like what Virginia does, the pack line defense and stuff like that, kind of keeping guys out the paint. Suddenly he has to become a jump shooter, and that's just not been his strength. North Carolina's got a great development staff, and I guess Hubert Davis may be on the outs after last season. So it's been up and down, I guess. But I feel like that's a program where it's going to like get the better coaching and get high level coaching and hopefully work on those kinds of things. It was certainly his feedback from the G League Combine when he went in 2022, right? So
yeah, man, that's so interesting. And it's funny, you talked about kind of the Lopey kind of, what kind of athlete is he? Like, from the first time I had kind of watched clips of him, I mistakenly was like, oh man, he's so uber athletic just from a few short things. But then when I started really watching longer highlights and full game kind of things, I was like, oh no, he's really just that dude at the Y that's like taking your lunch money by being a savvy veteran. So Parker, how is it that his like quote unquote old man game is just so effective?
Well, I will say, and we did our best to try and rush him, but I don't feel bad because I don't feel like anyone in the state of Texas could do it. He doesn't get rushed. So if he gets the ball and you're trying to collapse or trying to make him pick it up or whatever, he's so big and so long. He does a great job of thinking like what Magic Johnson would do in the late 80s, right? Where he'd put his butt and like kind of use his length to keep the ball away from other guards. He's great at that kind of stuff and the slow back down, even from the perimeter. And again, it's not sexy or flashy or even very fast, but it's just you can't take the ball from him very effectively. He is waiting for someone to get open, so you got to have the guys get open. But
he's not black holing it when he's doing that.
No, exactly. It's not Kobe.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I say it's not the Kobe Bryant. He's jacking the ball 45 times a game or anything like that afterwards. But he is able to keep the ball away from the defense.
And something that's been interesting to me, you kind of compared him to Draymond Green a couple times, and from some of the evaluations I've read have done the same. And it's so interesting in this day and age when being a shot, not just taker, but shot maker is at such a premium. Draymond is clearly someone that's been able to carve out a niche for himself and impact games in a major way while being just kind of a so-so shooter, as we're talking about Harrison Ingram. In fact, on a scouting report, I read, quote, this is from Brandon Jenkins, quote, he is a point forward who uses savvy, skill, and intelligence to dominate games. You and I, in texting about this, you had said to me, his point forward capabilities absolutely killed us because, quote, what do you do? Right. And so, Parker, my question is the Draymond Green comparison fair? And can Harrison Ingram essentially affect games in an impactful way, the same way that Draymond has, that we've all seen him doing for the Warriors for years now?
I think the ceiling is there, right? Draymond Green's an NBA Hall of Famer, right? So that feels like hard to get to. I will say though that he is the same kind of intelligence in that both guys know what the other 9 guys on the floor are doing at all times. They know the situation, they know the game, etc. And truthfully, I was impressed with him at Stanford in when it would be easy for a one and done or a future NBA type kid to get frustrated, he still had those moments where he's making the right play and just watching teammates clank threes or just, and that's not necessarily something that every future pro is going to think through, right? Not every future pro is going to think about this is the best play for us or whatever. The one thing I'll also say, and it's hard to keep for me as an outsider to keep track of the Carolina roster like you and the listener too, because it's had a lot of turnover. The thing I think he and Draymond both do well that makes the immediate comparison is if you've got shooters around him, good luck covering them one-on-one because you can't leave those guys, right? If you can, have a low post to have the drop off and then some shooters, suddenly it's like, oh man, you have to try and stay in front of 6'7", 220 1-on-1. You can't that's not easy either.
Yeah. Wow. So then the next move becomes almost exactly what you just said. Given all of this, how does Harrison Ingram fit with the 23-24 Tar Heels? And how exactly can or should Hubert Davis utilize this very unique player? We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, we are joined today on Locked on Tar Heels by my man Parker Ainsworth. He is the host of Locked on Cougs, our network's Houston Cougars podcast. As a high school basketball coach, has coached against Harrison Ingram, has had a very up close and personal opportunity to scout against him and try to knock he and his team off. And so, Parker, as we think about the fit with the Tar Heels, I just want to first ask a very big, broad question. I feel like Harrison Ingram is one of those players who you have to almost get creative with in order to appropriately utilize his skill set in a way that benefits your team. How would you suggest, if you were coaching Harrison Ingram, Hubert Davis would go about doing that?
So I'd work him a lot more between the elbows and top of the key type spots. Again, I liked watching him at Stanford because I like watching guys that I coached against and the handful that I coached themselves. And I feel like it's interesting to watch him at Stanford get used on the low block, at the short corner and that kind of stuff. And not that he couldn't do those things, but that becomes there's just only so much a traditional big can do in those spots. Right. And I think he's got abilities that he shows at NFL and to the NBA G League combines and stuff like that to do more of the outside kind of stuff. I don't know with how many guards have got on their roster. I don't know if you want to put him necessarily as one of, like, if you want to go 4 out 1 in with Bacot. But I think the high-low action from like 17 feet out with Bacot would be really, really fun to watch. And I hope you're on the upside of the bracket if that thing's rolling. But I think that kind of area of the floor, more traditional high posts, there's all kinds of offenses and stuff like that where you would run even a same side double drag where you pull in the guard across and then instead he just short rolls to the nail, or the nail being in the middle of the free throw line.
Right.
Where he then can square up and, he's got his own left hand to the side, or he's got Bacot to his right if he drives and drops or whatever. And then I'm assuming some shooter. Y'all got a freshman coming in from the Houston area too, Jae'lyn High.
Yeah.
I don't know what position you project him as either. But he may be more of the drop-off guy as well. But the idea that you could have guys around him to where it forces defense to truly like stay in front of him and make him play one-on-one where he can just, use his size and drive, because he finds open guys so well. So if you can find him in that space, that'd be what I would want to do with him. And then defensively, I think he helps Bacot out a lot in that he can switch along the perimeter in a way that I feel like not every big can. And so Bacot can get to guard the more traditional big guy, right? Neither one of those guys is in what I would call like marathon running shape right now, right? But I think that allows Bacot to be more of your traditional big man down low, and Harrison uses his length really well on the perimeter. So I would think that would help him in switching kind of situations out there. But again, it's hard to keep track of how many guards are coming in and out of Carolina these days.
Right. And it's interesting because Coach Davis has had conversations about him coming in and playing the 3 as opposed to the 4. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. As you said, right now there are 6 like 1s and 2s on the roster. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see more of a 3 and 4 guard lineup with some regularity for the Tar Heels next year. We'll obviously watch and see how that is. Parker, one of the things that interests me about Stanford versus Carolina is that at Stanford, as the most talented player on the roster, basically he has to be the man, Harrison Ingram. Coming to North Carolina, where it's, as you said, Armando Bacot and then RJ Davis, they're going to be the guys that are going to be the volume shooters. And Harrison Ingram can come in and be the 3rd, or depending, who else might be on the floor, the 4th scoring option. Is like, how does that change things for him? Who, in high school, yes, he was trying to be the distributor, but at times needed to be the guy. At Stanford, same kind of thing. And so what kind of pressure does that alleviate from him, and how might it enable him to lean more into his strengths?
Well, I have to say, especially when you look at like college defenses and there's, no three in the key, no defensive three in the key and that kind of stuff. Like, I think having other guys will pull defenses away from the rim and allow him to operate a little bit better. Whereas at Stanford, that wasn't necessarily the case. I want to point out it was maybe relative to competition, but he had more space to operate with in high school. They had a really darn good team, Isaac. And in truth, I think that's the kind of guy that got to be a McDonald's All-American. And so getting his way to a blue blood after, frankly, I think having disappointing draft projections. I don't think he had a disappointing career, all things considered, at Stanford. But he got invited to the combine. They gave him stuff to work on. I think somewhere said that he was projected in like the top 90 for this year's NBA draft. Obviously 60 are drafted, so that's not great. And I think that kind of getting to play with good basketball players the same way, like, we joke about how poorly Draymond shoots, looks like he has a backpack on, and we keep using that as the comparison. If Draymond Green weren't playing with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and you clog the lane, suddenly his game looks a lot different too. That's right? It certainly did when Steph and Klay were hurt that one year. And so I think giving him options around at North Carolina, and frankly, they'll have expectations. Like they need to put in, they can't like, oh, we're going to play our young guys. No, they don't have time for all that. They need to win games. And so I think that'll be good for him for sure. And then, I go back to, he was a selfless kid. And so I don't imagine he's going to be the kind of guy that's like, I got to get my 25 to go to the league, because he's never really been that guy. But I guess he may still have a similar stat line with more impactful winning out of it, if that makes any sense.
It makes absolute sense, because what I hear you saying is what joining this more talent-rich roster does for him is allows him to be more the high school version of himself, funnily enough, than the Stanford version of himself, which allows him to better impact the game. He's a guy that doesn't need a lot of shots to be high level on either side of the court, quite frankly. And so, and you look at somebody like RJ Davis, who will likely operate as the de facto point guard, but he is more of a score first guard. And so can Harrison Ingram be the facilitator, the initiator that gets things really going and allows RJ Davis to play? Goodness gracious, you just think about some of the unique possibilities that could happen there and how Harrison Ingram could help change. Listen, Carolina under Roy Williams and in Hubert Davis's first year was assisting on over 50% of their field goals. 54% 2 seasons ago, 55% 3 seasons ago. But this most recent year, the assist percentage was down to 45%. And it seems like Harrison Ingram has to be a guy that comes in and impacts that in a very, very meaningful way. And quite frankly, I cannot wait to see him carve up the Syracuse zone. I have circled that game on the calendar already. My friend Parker Ainsworth, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, folks. Big shouts to our guy Parker. Go give him a follow. If you enjoy great content, go check out the Locked On Cougs podcast as well. Yes, you're getting that sign over there for those of you watching on YouTube. You love to see it. Let's get those assist numbers up this year. It's crazy. He averaged 3.4 in his career at Stanford with not much talent around him. How could those numbers even climb now? Friends, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Please don't forget to go give us a 5-star review on Apple Reviews or anywhere else you get podcasts. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Follow me at Isaac Schade. Email us, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, smash the like button, and leave some great comments. Want to remind you that it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll be back with you tomorrow, but until then, peace.